Hello, my friends, and good morning. Patrick, PG Smith from PG Creative here. Today I want to talk about a book. The first book we're discussing on the PG Creative blog, but hopefully the first of many, because I love to read, I love to write, and I think that creating content about the books that I write, books that I read, could be a great way for me to reignite my desire to voraciously consume literature, as I did in my youth. So, this is less fictional than it is educational. Self-help, philosophical is probably the word to land on. The Courage to Be Disliked. An interesting title, right? How to free yourself, change your life, and achieve real happiness. It feels like the kind of goopy shit that you'd find in the self-help aisle of any random bookstore or on the front page of Amazon, right? And that's what I thought too until I did some more digging on the book, just out of curiosity from the title. And I found out that it's actually a distillation of the psychology of a man named Alfred Adler, right? So Adler is referred to as one of the three giants of 20th century psychology and philosophy. He is probably the least well known. Carl Jung and Freud, obviously, are the two big guys. Adler, he's an interesting guy with some interesting thoughts. And there's a lot of things in this book that I think could help people. Or at the very least are very interesting to ponder, right? The thing I will say, and I almost stopped reading. That's another interesting point here. I almost stopped because he makes some really bold claims, especially in the exposition of the way this is portrayed, which, like a lot of philosophical texts, this is a breakdown of what's, subject matter that is somewhat difficult to penetrate. Instead of just talking at you, it is done, in the Socratic way, which is master and student. It's just the transcript of a conversation between a boy who is lost, who is rejecting, at first, Adlerian psychology and these principles, until he somewhat, over the course of these days and these interactions with this teacher, this philosopher, and someone who's been following the Adlerian way for a long time, he slowly but surely comes to understand and appreciate and even adopt these tenets, right? And so the goal there, obviously, is that you as the reader are in his shoes. You're learning with him, and your resistance is residing as you go and as you learn with him, right? So, all of that to say, let's talk about it, because I think there's a lot of great stuff in here. I will again say I cannot condone everything in this book. I hope that would be implied, right? Just because I'm talking about a piece of art does not mean that I'm condoning everything that is claimed or put across by that piece, especially around trauma, right? So Adler goes as far to say that trauma does not exist, which that is factually incorrect. I believe we have completely disproved that at this point from a psychological standpoint. Trauma is a real thing, and I would hate to, take something like that and remove the substance and the realness from it that people feel, right? I think that that's wrong, but his thoughts on trauma are interesting. And I guess we'll start there. Well, essentially with Adler, right, he believes in the way that Freud was very based upon this happened when you were a kid. Something bad happened. You had a traumatic experience, right? And that's the sole explanation for the reason you are the way now, right? Like maybe a gun went off right next to your ear when you were 5. This is a very small example. And maybe it hit your uncle and killed him. Let's make it even more traumatic, right? And now you're terrified of loud noises. You're absolutely terrified. Freud would say, you need to get in there, get into your mind, your body, your id, your ego, and get that shit out of there. And then you'll be fine. But it's going to take some work because it's in you, right? It's trauma. It's real. It's a part of your subconscious, which there's a whole process there for diving into the subconscious and extracting that. Adler would be on the opposite side of that spectrum, right? He rejects causality and says, okay, things just happen, right? They're not connected in this way. You are afraid, right? And fear, the opposite of which is courage, plays a big role in this book. You are afraid, is what Adler would say. You're afraid of going to that party where there might be loud noises because maybe there's someone that you like is going to be there, or you have social anxiety, or this or that. And Adler would say that you are, even if you are not aware, you are subconsciously using that event from your past as a reason not to go. Even if you yourself are not aware of the fact that you're doing so, you're protecting yourself and staying safe, staying within your routine of sitting in your office maybe, making a video, instead of going out and living the life that you want to live. And you're using these events from the past that are actually in no way, he would essentially say that you can wake up tomorrow and become a completely new person, right? And reject everything. At any point you can pivot in any direction, 180, 270 degrees, whatever, right? And so that obviously is extremely controversial. And I can't say that I fully, or even to some extent, condone that. I agree with the fact that you can grow past things and you can learn from things. And I do think we have more power over our futures, even in relation to past events, than we believe. But I feel like I would land somewhere in the middle of that spectrum, probably a little bit more towards the Adlerian side, that you can, take control. But trauma is real. And these are very real things. So that was a place to start. Where do we go from here? There's so much to talk about. I'm going to try to keep this as concise as possible and just talk about the big points that I thought really stood out, and most importantly, that I think would resonate with you, my audience, and what can help us learn, and what's the most applicable to, us living our everyday lives now in 2024 in the chaos in which we reside, right? So that being said, we're going to start from the very beginning. We're going to work through and just find little pieces and bits that, for me, as I was reading, really jumped off the page and screamed, yes, this is valuable. This is real. This translates to a real life issue that or maybe somebody in my audience is facing right now. So let's do it. Like I mentioned earlier, this is broken down into 5 different nights. And so I think the best way to tackle this is to go from night 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, right? And we're in a good spot now because night 1 is the foundation of night 1 is essentially what I just discussed, right? Trauma does not exist. You are choosing actively to not change your life, right? And there's a great, absolutely perfect passage here that I just found on page 34, where the philosopher says to the boy, yes, Adlerian psychology is a psychology of courage. Your unhappiness cannot be blamed on your past or your environment. And it isn't that you lack competence. You simply lack courage. One might say that you are lacking in the courage to be happy. That's it right there, right? And so, night 1 for this young boy and for us as the reader, it's this radical shift in what we know, especially in today's world where there's less accountability, right? And there's more, I think it's so much easier for us to blame things on our past or our circumstance than it ever has been before. And what Adler would say is, no, that your life is decided in the here and now. Any moment you could pick up the courage to be the person that you want to be, but you don't want to be. You think you do, but you're protecting yourself, right? You're afraid. You don't have the courage that you need to go and to become that person, right? And so it's fascinating how angry the boy, and then the reader even will get too, because essentially what Adler and what the teacher in this novel is doing is saying, no, this is on you. You've been thinking this entire time that you are a victim of circumstance, but you've been using your circumstance to actively victimize yourself. Yes, your circumstances maybe play a minor role in things, but at the end of the day, that's the past. And Adler would say, you are attributing a false relationship between what's happened in the past to what's happening now, and most importantly, to what could happen in the future. You can change everything right now. Right after you watch this video, you could close your phone and you could go completely refashion your life. But 99.99999% of people don't have the courage to do that because it's scary, and change is scary, and it takes courage to make that change. And so that's the foundation. That's night one. And the boy gets pissed, and the reader gets pissed, and we're like, oh, I guess I'll keep hearing this guy out, whatever. And the boy goes home. And that takes us to night two, where we talk about not ourselves, but other people. And the main thesis of night two, building on this foundation of no, we can be who we want to be, is this. Every problem that you have, all problems that exist are interpersonal problems between two people. Let's dissect that. Another bold claim, right? This idea that everything is based off relationships. And it's interesting because Adler would say that, hey, if you could live by yourself, outside of society, you would have no problems. But that is not possible. As long as one other person exists, you can try and be alone, but it's not going to happen, right? And so from this, we begin to hear many lessons that probably sound familiar. These concepts of life not being a competition. Comparison, right? They say comparison is the death of joy, the thief of joy. And Adler basically takes 30, 40, 50 pages to say exactly that, right? He says many things. He says one important thing too. Stop worrying about your appearance. And your appearance, that can be a blank line that you can fit. Stop worrying about this, as it relates to what people are thinking about you or judging you, because he says they're not. They're not, right? Like, think about the way that you perceive other people on any given day. 1% of the scrutiny in that look, in that analysis of any given person, when they walk up, you see them for the first time, than the way and the level at which you scrutinize yourself in the mirror in the morning, right? That's the difference. You are yourself. You've been noticing these things for years, for however long you've been alive, but they're not, right? And that should not be disheartening. That should be liberating. Liberating that people are not noticing these little things about you that you're picking at, right? Because you are not content with yourself. And why is that, right? Because you're comparing yourself to other people, right? You're falling for this trap, and Adler would call it the life lie, right? This idea of like, I have to do certain things only to do them, just because, well, this person did that, and I need to be better than this person. Better comparison, right? No. Exist in the space that you're in. Identify your tasks, and we'll talk more about tasks soon, but tasks are exactly that. Like, this is who I am. What do I need to do? Both from a standpoint of within the context of society, what do I need to do from like I have family tasks, I have companion tasks, I need to be a good husband perhaps, I need to be a good father, a good friend, a good mentor, a good boss, whatever, right? And those are your natural tasks. But then you also have the tasks that you yourself find, right? I need to make YouTube videos. Do I have to do that? No, but I'm somebody who loves to be on camera, who loves to create, who loves to do these things. So that's my task, right? And identifying that task and executing on that task is what matters. Not the comparison or the weight of that task versus somebody else's, because that's not mine. They keep their tasks. So they want to go do their thing. They can, because they are them, and I am me, and you are you. And we must identify our tasks, both the ones that just come naturally by way of being a part of society and us wanting to contribute to the joy and to the progression of our, our friends and communities and families and loved ones, etc. And that's the important part right there, right? Is this concept of, he also talks a lot about braggarts and the people who, and again, we've heard this in the past. It's the same ideas get recycled over and over again. We know this. This concept of, if you're really good at something, you don't need to talk about it because other people will do it for you. But if you're good at something and you're talking about it, that's a sign to others that you're like, oh my God, am I actually good at this? No, you're probably not. You just need everyone to think you are. We've heard that in a million different ways, but it's very, very true, right? And so let's talk a little more before we move to the night 3, because at the end of this book, he talks about, again, the comparison, begins to introduce tasks. He talks about the life lie, right? The life lie is a major component of Adlerian society, right? So it's a big term. And here's exactly how it is described in the book. It's a severe term. One shifts one's responsibility for the situation one is currently in to someone else. One is running away from one's life tasks by saying that everything is the fault of other people or the fault of one's environment. It's exactly the same as the story I mentioned earlier about the female student with the fear of blushing, which, context there, he told the boy the story about this girl, she liked this boy, and she wanted to approach him, but she had this fear because whenever she got embarrassed or talked to a man, she blushed. And again, this is a harsh take. Adlerian psychology, and so by proxy, this philosopher said, no, she's only blushing because she's afraid to talk to this boy. She's afraid, and so she's creating this. It's happening. It's a psychosomatic reaction, which he talks more about that later. But it's interesting, right? One lies to oneself, and one lies to the people around them too, right? That's the whole thing. The life lie is exactly that. It's this idea of running from what you need to do and saying that your environment, your circumstance, your past, that these are the reasons we've been running away, right? And so that's night 2, talking about our tasks, what we need to do, who we are, moving away from comparison. Night 3 is about other people's tasks. So let's talk a little bit about that right now. Chapter 3 opens with a reaffirmation of many of the things discussed in 2, which, again, talking about identifying tasks. And there's one example used here that and when I first read this, I thought, oh my God, this is crazy. But this really underscores just how much they mean, hey, separate your tasks here. And by they, I mean, Adler and his disciples. This example of separation tasks involves a parent and their child, right? Parents and their child. And it's interesting because the child is somebody who does not want to study, right? This is a very real example. It doesn't want to do his homework, her homework, their homework. And the parents are going to force the child to do that in a way that is probably non-conducive to the child wanting to study in the future, meaning they're going to take away dinner or take away his or her or their Xbox, right? And what Adler would say is that what they're doing is they're taking on their child's task. Let's break it down, right? And so in their mind, they're helping their child. They're doing the task of the parent, right? They're removing this, taking punitive measures to get the child to study. Adler would say, no, this is one-off. You think that's what you're doing, but in reality, you are doing the child's task. Even if he's a child, they're a child. Let's assume it's a lazy young boy. Even if he does not want to study, it's his task to find the desire to study, and it's your task as the parent not to get him to study, but to guide him to that desire. Whether it's by positive encouragement, finding ways as a parent to affirm them and give them the confidence. And if you're a parent, I'm not a parent, but you're probably listening and thinking, oh my God, this guy never had kids. Adler never had kids. I don't know. Don't shoot the messenger here. But the goal would really be for you to give, maybe invite him to help you wash the dishes or make dinner, or just something that gives them confidence. And Adler would say through that confidence and through that affirmation, they will naturally find a way to want to study, right? There's other things at play here. Maybe it's maybe it's fear. And your job is not to get them to study. It's to help them circumvent the fear that is preventing them from studying, right? Another really interesting anecdote is about the Gordian knot, right? And so Alexander the Great, there's a story about this knot in Asia, right? A tightly wound knot that many men of skill had been certain they could unbind, but no one had succeeded. And so the legend went that whoever cut the Gordian knot would be the king of everything, the master of Asia, right? Whoever untied the Gordian knot, And so when Alexander the Great got there, what do you think he did? Did he untie the knot? No. He took his sword out and he cut it. He sliced it right by the knot and said, destiny is not something brought about by legend, but by clearing away with one's own sword. He had no use for the power of legend and would forge his destiny with the sword. And then he went on to become, the greatest conqueror in the history of ever. And so, what do we think that this means in the context of Adlerian psychology, right? It's this idea that we can do things, right? That we can separate these tasks and we can find a way ourselves, agently, proactively, to create our own future, right? To build our own legacy. And we have these things, like the Gordian knot. We might think we will never be this person that we long to be or be at the point we want to be until we can untie the Gordian knot, because we're not even realizing that we can just slice it and cut it and move on, and that we have a sword in our hand, right? That's the thing. That's the point of him including that, exactly that, is that we can cut this. And also, right, just to think about it, for us to marinate on what this could mean in the context of it, right? The last thing he says in that paragraph, in that chapter, when Alexander the Great cut the Gordian knot, there were probably those who said, wait a minute, no, like unraveling the knot by hand had meaning. It was a mistake. And Alexander misunderstood the words. But in Adlerian psychology, there are aspects that are antithetical to normal social thinking. Denies etiology, denies trauma, and adopts teleology. Etiology is, the causal, this happened, so now I have trauma and I can't do this. Teleology is it all just exists and it just happens, right? It treats people's problems as interpersonal relationship problems, and the not seeking of recognition and the separation of tasks are also things that are, antithetical to normal social thinking, right? And so it's really interesting. It's really interesting. He moves on and he talks about the desire for recognition, right? It makes you unfree. That's the first line in this chapter, is that when you are searching through comparison, again, a lot of similarities to the book too, when you're searching for that and finding these things, you're doing other people's tasks for them, right? You are losing your own freedom in the chaos of comparison in other people's lives. And he closes here with what is the thesis of the book, right? The final subchapter of the third night, what real freedom is, right? What is real freedom? Well, he sums it up in short. Freedom is being disliked by other people. And that's radical too, right? That's crazy. Because we have this idea, these concepts that we all want to be liked, especially I think in the era of the internet. And that's a big reason I started to read this book, actually. Is I'm somebody who I want everyone to like me. For whatever reason. Maybe Freud would know more about that. Adler would reject it and say, no, you think that, that's an excuse, whatever. Either way, that's why I wanted to read this book before I knew anything about it. The courage to be disliked, that was a fascinating concept to me, and that's what they dive into here. At the very end of the third night, this concept of freedom through having the courage to be yourself. And what Adler and this philosopher, what they say about that is that if you are truly being yourself, if you are having the courage to be free to carry out your tasks, leaving other tasks to the right people, living your true life, you will be disliked. They use an old Yiddish Jewish proverb or example where they get 10 people on a line and they ask them about a certain thing, whatever. If you ask 10 people about anything, one person is going to hate it, no matter what the fuck it is, right? Maybe even 2 or 3 other people. If it's a thing, right? If it's the right level of opinion. If it's net neutral, if it's just like, hey, what about the color blue? Everyone's going, well, I don't mind color blue, whatever. But true existence, the courage to be yourself, to have an opinion, right? To say Adler's right, to say Adler's wrong, to say blue's the best color in the world. 1 or 2 people are not going to agree with that, and that's okay, because their task is to agree or disagree. Your task is to decide that that's your opinion, and then your important task at the crux of all of this is to have that opinion and to proclaim it, because you're not afraid of being disliked. You have the courage to be yourself and to reject your past and to just embrace who you are, what you think. Put it out there, knowing full well that to exist as you need to exist, to be disliked to some degree, is a natural byproduct of that existence, of that freedom. And that's book 3. In book 4, the title of book 4 is Where the Center of the World Is. So we're moving in a different direction here, but we're still building off of what we've talked about with tasks and courage and all that good stuff. So let's talk about that now. So now we spent 2 whole books really honing in on the I, on the relationship we have with ourselves. And we're going to zoom out again, even more so this time, and talk in book 4 really about how we relate to the world around us in society, right? And so Adlerian psychology is very much based off finding and identifying yourself and your task and building that courage, but then thinking about, again, the ways that we exist within society, within the context in which we live, to quote a stupid TikTok from RVP. Anyway, it's interesting because you would think that this idea of being disliked, of being oneself, of finding tasks, of keeping their tasks to themselves, it seems very solipsistic, selfish even, and that's not the case, right? Once you do all these things, once you identify your tasks and you're at the point where you're ready to, engage, which again, Adler would say you have to engage. The moment you exist, you're born in a society, people are going to be around you. You're not by yourself like the Twilight Zone with the guy with the books and his glasses, whatever. That's a deep dive reference. Anyway, you get what I'm saying. And so this concept of listening to the voice of the larger community, right? There's a whole chapter in here that's titled, You Are Not the Center of the World. And that's a big part of this, is that it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking about the I in context of relationships with other people and with society, right? What can I get from this relationship? What can I get from this exchange, this interaction? And Adler says that is the wrong way to think. If you do that, you are setting yourself up for disappointment, because you will constantly be sad and disappointed when you don't get what you want, when you're constantly searching for, okay, what's in it for me? However, if you reframe your mindset, you think about your tasks, their tasks, about the society in which you live, and you think instead, okay, about what you can do for other people, right? And again, this is golden rule type shit. It's been recycled and retranslated a million times, but it's the same thing. This idea of service unto other people is the greatest reward unto yourself, right? And that's something that Adler embraces, that the best way to find fulfillment for you is to help other people, and is to be of service to other people and to your community at large. That will give you what Adler calls a feeling of community. From the lessons and the rules that we discussed in the past 2 books, that's where you find your feeling of self. And now we're talking about it at a much larger scale. Externally, how do you find your feeling of community? By being needed, by providing a service, by helping. That is how you find that feeling of community that Adler would argue is essential to who you are and to the right kind of living, the right kind of life, right? And so another interesting thing in book 4 is about the way we vertical versus horizontal relationships, right? And so a vertical relationship is going to be any relationship with like a master and student type of relationship, right? And so essentially Adler would push you towards having nothing but horizontal relationships, meaning we are on the same footing. And so there's a chapter in here as well that says, do not rebuke or praise. Do not criticize, nor should you say, hey, great work. Neither of those. Because the very foundation of that exchange is vertical, right? It's, hey, you did a great job. And they go as far to say in here that it almost feels like you're being talked down to, which I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. But what they would advocate for, as opposed to criticism or encouragement, would be, well, encouragement, right? It'd be this concept of not praising, but encouraging, of saying, hey, keep going. Continue to do this. This is not even this is great, right? This is just good effort. Keep moving forward. That, from an Adlerian standpoint, is a horizontal and therefore healthy relationship, right? It's one of just movement, of pushing. And that takes us back to what we talked about with the parents and the son who would not study, right? They could rebuke him. What the hell? Why aren't you studying? No Xbox. That's not going to work. They could praise him like, hey, you got a C, great job. He's going to rest on his laurels. Encouragement, we really noticed you've been working hard lately. You've been studying a lot lately. You've been doing good in school. That level of encouragement, yeah, you know what? I have been working hard. Or, yeah, you know what? I am smart. I am doing well in school. That is going to keep the task within that boy's zone, meaning he's going to be the one who wants to study, who has agency to study. He's not forced to study by his parents because that's not their task. They think it is, but in reality, when they do that, they're not actually trying to help the boy. They're trying to help themselves feel like good parents. That's what Adler would argue. Whether or not you agree with it is up to you. But, hey, I just lay it out, right? And so the encouragement approach, this idea of finding value within that, and then at the very end, we move into what will be a big part of the final book, the fifth night, which is about being present, right? To live earnestly in the here and now. We talked about trauma, about past, talked about the now, about our relationships with ourselves, about having the courage to be disliked. We talked about the context in which we live, society, what that means, how we find that community feeling by being of service to others. And now we're getting into the final point, again, which is to live earnestly in the here and now. All right, in classic philosophical fashion, the final book here is a series of sort of different but impactful points, driving home a lot of the setup, the foundational, theses that have been put forward up to this point, starting with excessive self-consciousness, right? This idea of navel-gazing, looking inward, and that's reiterated in different ways throughout this chapter. We talk about living like you're dancing, living in an managerial way as opposed to a kinetic way, which essentially means as opposed to trying to go from A to B, just exist, right? Just exist in the moment. They say shine a light on the here and now and just be here. Just be present in where you are, right? Talking a little more about some different life lies, one of which is workaholism, these ideas of superiority, right? Trying to be better than other people, comparing yourself to other people. There's one chapter in here, subchapter, that talks about the courage to be normal, right? This idea of why you have this desire to stand out and to be special, but in reality, like, we all have that inclination, right? And so why can't you just be your own? Have the courage to be your own normal self and to be okay with that, right? To embrace who you are, limitations, strengths, talents, flaws, and all. And understand that in that way you are normal, but you're just normally you, which is sort of a paradox because it makes you unique and it makes you special, right? And so the biggest thing that he puts forward in this final chapter here is this concept, again, of it can happen now, right? He even talks to the boy about young people can lead the way, right? Adler says this a lot. He talks about this idea, and the boy rejects him, even at this late stage in their conversation, in a way I think many young people would. And he says, well, why would the adults lead the way? Well, the adults lead the way. They're the ones who set the example. And he says, well, why can't you, right? Like, you're putting yourself into a vertical relationship based on age, on time on this planet, right? And saying, well, no, what they do is what I need to be doing because they're above me. But no, we're all on one horizontal plane, living normally, living truthfully, doing our tasks, contributing to society to find that fulfillment externally, finding it internally by having the courage to be ourselves, to possibly be disliked. But we're not worried about these other things. We're not comparing ourselves. We're not falling into the life lies of workaholism, of superiority complexes, of comparison, right? We're simply existing in the here and now, dancing our own unique dance in the present, unbothered by everything else, right? And there are times, again, when that dance plays a part in the room at large, in the dance floor in society. That's great, that's fine. We're living our unique dance in the context of this bigger party going on. We feel at home. We're at home in our own dance. We're at home in the community in which, we are dancing. It's that dichotomy between peace within and balance and affirmation externally, right? And one can't exist without the other. They both have to be present in order for this relationship and this ecosystem that Adler puts forward as joy, as happiness, as courage to be yourself. That's the only way that this works. And the final chapter of this book is about meaning, finding meaning and assigning meaning. And Adler goes as far to say is, I think it's easy to look at this life that we live, all this different life that we all live, and say there's no meaning to any of this. And you might be right. Objectively speaking, from that perspective, maybe you're right. What that means to Adler, and again, within the context of all of this, of the dance, of the societal, the community feeling that Adler puts forward, you have to find your own meaning. You yourself have to find who you are, what your tasks are, what drives you. Have the courage to be yourself, to be disliked, have the courage to be happy, to reject your past, to stop blaming the trajectory on your life, on what's happened before, and exist in the here and now. And assign, maybe meaning for you is this, is making YouTube videos. Maybe it's playing guitar. Maybe it's whatever you want it to be, right? And again, that's not a new concept, but when it's presented in this way, in this context, it's powerful, right? It's really powerful because it's freeing. And with the confidence that you have in the way you're living your life, both, again, and I've been saying this over and over again, but that really is the dualistic relationship at the heart here. The one with yourself and the one with others, with society at large. Finding that balance, finding that harmony, finding your own courage, and then having the courage to say, no, this is what I think life means. This is what I want my life to mean because it's yours. It's fucking yours, and you can do with it what you want. Don't waste it. Don't use your past as an excuse to not do things, because this moment, this very moment, you could close this tab on your computer or your phone, and you could change your fucking life right now. And that's what Adler would say. Do it. You're afraid. Don't be afraid. Do it. I'm PG from PG Creative. I hope you enjoyed this breakdown of this book that I really enjoyed. Hoping to do more of these in the future. There's a sequel to this, and if you enjoyed this, engage. Wherever you are, newsletter, sub, YouTube sub. I'm posting on LinkedIn, other places as well, so just, you can find me. I'm out there. Show the love for this, and more of this will come. Possibly even the sequel to this, which expands upon, the Adlerian foundation we have here, which this is just the foundation, just the beginning. In book 2, which is the courage to be happy. This one is the courage to be disliked. Once we find this courage, then we find the next courage. Or so I would guess. So, again, thanks for the time. Hope you enjoyed this video. Have a great rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening. And show me some love if you did. Go change the world. Go change your life. At the very least, find the beginning inklings of the courage you'll need to do either of those things. Thanks.